විශ්වාසෙට
අපේ මුතුන් මිත්තු හෙම කළේ පාර වරදින එකක් නෑ කියන විශ්වාසයෙන්.
ඉතින් තාමත් පාරවල්
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We are ready for the final session. So in the morning session was about understanding the latest trends in global economy, and then we discussed regional economies, key markets, and of course Sri Lankan economy, what we can expect next year. And then we had a very interesting afternoon session on budget, and I think the panel was excellent, and we got really interesting, insightful, impactful comments about the budget. So we are now finally in one of the most interesting areas. In the current context, the new normal is volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity. I think they are increasing in an exponential order, not just incremental order. So these gentlemen who are here are operating in that kind of an environment. Okay, we have the wonderful opportunity of having Dumindi Lianwala, but affectionately known as D. D is the executive director of the Exchange Technology of London Stock Exchange, and he is responsible. He has this I don't know how he sleeps in the night. I have absolutely no idea, because something like 3 trillion transactions a day, or something in that magnitude runs on, based, the technology he manages. Then we have Vajra, very experienced financial services person and currently chairman of Colombo Stock Exchange. Manu Titavela also need no introduction to this this audience. Manu has, well, public, private, give an area, he has been present for the last 30 years. And Rajitha is, I've been wondering how does he manage this business in this complex environment and the global market volatility, but achieving and delivering absolutely great numbers. So Rajitha is the managing director of HECAB. And we have Kumudu, one of the few people I shamelessly exploit, their generosity too. So one more thing, the collective market capitalization of the organization these four gentlemen represent is over $20 billion. Okay, so we are talking about heavyweights in the industry. And Manu wants to know how I calculated that. I will tell you after a couple of drinks. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our business leader, roundtable panelist. Over to you, Kumudu.
Great. Thank you, Lakshman. On that optimistic note, I must say you're very optimistic about the future. And I must take umbrage to the picture you have there. Sounds like there's an impending recession coming anytime. So hopefully we'll shed some light and some optimism to the year ahead. So, an often used phrase is think global, act local. So taking that as a marker, I want to start the discussion more from a global perspective. What are some of the key global drivers that are affecting growth in the next year? And the biggest thing that happened recently is the election of Donald Trump to be the president of the United States. And as he would call it, it's huge, right? Yeah. So Manu, what would be the Trump effect, so-called Trump effect on Sri Lanka?
Well, I think basically the short answer is there's one thing certain about Donald Trump is that he's completely out of the box and utterly unpredictable. So that's a difficult question to answer. But having said that, I mean, somebody told me the other day that from whatever side US politicians come and when they assume the post of president, America over a period of time tends to move back to the center. Yeah. Basically how long it will take, how much of the presidency he will live on his election promises, or how they will move back to more sort of middle of the road strategies is yet to be seen. But one basic thing is, I think, led by the US, this whole concept of global trade pacts will be revisited.
Yeah, so the TPP is
yeah. TPP was a bit of, in my personal opinion, an ambitious thing, which I think has still, I believe, very laudable medium to long-term goals. But I don't think anybody is thinking in the short term, in the medium term, more on the short term. So Trump has actually basically said that he's going to rescind or withdraw the US support for the TPP on the first day of his administration. And that was not too different to what I think candidate Clinton said also at some point in a rally. But what will happen, I think, with Brexit as well as the new administration in the US, some of the trade deals that are in the pipeline will get shelved, and some of the trade deals that have already been done might get renegotiated. Like, for instance, I think I noticed somewhere that the Canadian Prime Minister has said that they are more than willing to look at the NAFTA arrangement and to renegotiate it. So there will be some renegotiation. I hope that it won't result in a sort of tariff-type warfare, which I have my doubts that it will. Then bilateral agreements will become critical. Now, this is where I think in the short term Sri Lanka has to be very quick and very smart. We need to tie up the bilateral arrangements. And And I think we do export a lot of our garments to the US still.
Yeah.
So I think we need to see some advantages there.
Yeah.
And while we still support aspects of the World Trade Organization, we really need to get going on bilateral trade.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mona. And so it's basically what you're saying is that there's protectionist policies are going, Trump is promoting more protectionist policies, and NAFTA will be probably the key focus, with Mexico being the biggest target. So with that, Rajat, I mean, you're in the export industry, one of the largest exporters in Sri Lanka. How would, what impact would that have on Sri Lanka if Trump were to pursue more protectionist policies?
Yes, I believe, adding on to what Manu said, I think it's a very opportunistic moment if proper lobbying can be done to get the best bilateral arrangements with the US, especially with the current government's friendly approach and the more acceptance from the Western Bloc. I think that creates a very good opportunity. If you look at from an export point of view, I think one other big dimension here is how would Trump administration react to China? That is a big question that no one can answer at the moment, because there are very serious ramifications on both sides if that imbalance in the short term the administration tries to change. However, for example, from the industry that I come in, for example, if you look at the active carbon market, at the moment, for coal carbon, there is anti-dumping tariff for the US, and every year this is being revised. So already in the industry, that is we are in the coconut carbon manufacture and export business, and US is by far our largest market. So there are ramifications of that. Already this is anti-dumping tariff is on, and every year is this being revised. So there are, and coconut carbon is, for example, is a direct substitute and alternative to coal carbon. So there will be a large impact. I mean, what we need to realize is the gurus of the free trade and globalization are finding itself to justify to their society because of the very huge income disparities and the unequal sharing of the pie in the developed nations. So basically the inclusivity in the developed countries are also becoming a major issue. So this is one reason why Brexit happened, and also the Trump's win over a very unexpected win. So there are certain deliverables, or rather in the short term, whilst I agree with Mano that there is a tendency in the US that always it pivots back to the center, there would be some short to medium term ramifications. So US is likely to have more nationalistic, more protectionism measures, so which probably would be targeting some of the major trading partners in the short to medium term. So Sri Lanka can have very strong bilateral relationships, and there could be very important niches that we can capitalize on.
Yeah, so in terms of niches, I think Ambassador Keshap mentioned at one of the forums that with Trump, manufacturing is going to be more protectionist, while information technology, innovation, there's an opportunity for companies that do IT-related innovation and innovation in general. So coming from the technology from a technology background, how should Sri Lanka position itself? How should we position ourselves to kind of get on the bandwagon of innovation and promote exports, innovation-led exports?
Yeah, so a couple of things to say. Firstly, elaborating on Raj's theme, Trump coming to power is a sort of one point in one of these theme of things that's happened globally. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, this is really the sort of bad side of capitalist globalization effect, really. I mean, I'm personally an advocate of globalization, capitalist free market way of operating. So I haven't personally got anything against it, but there are bad effects. So that gives that gives rise to sort of nationalistic sentiments, and that has happened in Europe. Jean-Marie Le Pen, Brexit, now US, and it's likely to happen, for example, in France, Italy, and countries like that, and they're terrified about it. So what does this do? I mean, if you led to complete protectionist agenda, other than commercially, this also politically is bad. I mean, it does give, if you look at it from one perspective, it does give voice to a contingent of people, let's say, who are deprived of, as a result of this globalization. That's good. What's bad is the political agenda it drives, therefore what happens to the economies as a result, which is the bad effect. Right? So coming back to your specific question, Kumudu, I think, I mean, there are a number of trends globally that we are pretty well positioned to exploit if we sort ourselves out, so to speak. Those things are, so, I mean, Trump or not, the focus is cost effectiveness, efficiency, globally. Everybody's looking at it, right? So what traditionally tend to happen, volume-based, cost arbitrage type of industries are actually coming into fruition, and not much to be gained by operating the same way. So therefore, if you look at volume to value is the sort of transition that's to come with information technology and industries like that. And that's good news for Sri Lanka, because volume-wise, there's no way we can compete. Forget it. You might as well walk away, right? If you look at our nearest neighbor, etc. But given what's happening globally, that's an opportunity that one should actually...
So really pursue not the cost arbitrage, but the value arbitrage in terms of...
Correct. And one has to pick battles here, and one has to be clever about what one does going forward. If the investment skills climate that a lot of the panelists and delegates debated about, if we can sort that out, I think there's a great opportunity now here for the next 5 to 10 years that one can establish ourselves. I mean, if you look at places like Israel, one of the biggest threats globally is the cybersecurity. No one talks about cybersecurity without talking Israel, or some shape or form Israel's involved, right? The stuff that Israelis have done in terms of creating this investment climate and going after certain specific skills, like, for example, cybersecurity has reaped significant benefits. Right. So I think we are well positioned to
take the model.
Yeah.
So Vajru, what about, from a Colombo Stock Exchange perspective, did this whole global trend towards protectionism, with Brexit, Trump and others, did that have an impact on the market from a local perspective? That's question number one. And number two is, are our companies that are listed companies looking at innovation and looking at Israel as potentially a model for developing value-based exports?
I think, unfortunately, before Trump's incident and they came Sri Lankan internal problems, damages were done, so there were not much of a damage to be done after that. So,
so we hit the rock bottom before.
Yes, so we are at that stage now. Yeah. But I think if you think more deep into it, there are other uncertainties that are coming in. One is what will happen to interest rates. That's a major factor that will put money out of the market.
So you're talking about
local as well as for dollar.
Yes.
But dollar is much more prominent because foreign money can go out of the country. So that's one thing. Second one is that what will happen to some of the companies that are in the market. How will it affect their performance? I think especially this is the advantage or disadvantage of the market is that whole GDP is not reflected in the market. So some of the companies that are more local than really export-oriented type, large export-oriented companies are not listed. So if you say listed space, the effect will be more tourism, not it may be that high. On the other side, Sri Lanka rupee is also depreciated now.
Right.
But you asked the question, is there innovation happening? But I am very happy to see not in real space of listed companies. They will one day become listed. But if you see private equity, venture capital, that side, there are a lot of innovations, entrepreneurship has come in. When I went to Katubad, the Moratuwa University, there, if you don't go for lecture, it's supposed to be a bad thing and you may fail your exam. But now they can go out and start a business and come back. 5 years dropouts. This is like MIT and other places. So the attitudes of the...
So they're encouraging
entrepreneurship. And some of them are doing very well. They go out, they start mobile operations, they have some apps, and they earn about 1 million rupees a month, and they are employing people. And in private equity space also, we see now new companies coming up. Very young people are leading with a lot of qualification, not the traditional way of doing business. So that wave is happening in the other side.
That is happening independent of
the listed space.
Yeah.
So one day they will list, I'm sure, especially when private equity and venture capitals get involved, they will have to list. So, the wave is happening, but not at the scale that in the listed companies. But
Right.
it's more towards private equity and venture capitals.
You know, that's a good point in terms of Katubad, and because a friend, Cake Labs, there was a guy who came from Moratuwa, stayed 2 years, and then went to Facebook and got a top-notch job there. So that's the level of quality of people that are coming
Out of Google awards, I think about 60 awards that they have given during the last 5 years or so, about 28 awards went to Moratuwa University. Next one is 11, Toronto. Not even the Indians are not there.
Exactly.
So I think Moratuwa is also have not done a proper job or not publicizing it.
Yeah.
But the type of quality of people that we are getting is proven there.
Yeah, that's great news for the country as a whole in terms of people development. Kind of shifting gears more to South Asia. Mano, this question is for you. We have a rather tenuous relationship with India. Like them, don't like them, sometimes depending on the day, right? So what are the implications of a proposed trade agreement? Especially, if you look at it from a domestic consumption, because, EAP group is very much dependent on domestic demand. So what would be the effect?
On the first one, I think there's a lot of misinformation going around about EDCA, I feel. That's driven by the fact that there is this inherent fear of opening out economies, particularly trade. I suppose that's rational fear because people look at it in the paradigm that they are used to in the very short term. I personally don't feel that even if we sign EDCA, that we are going to get hordes of Indian barbers coming here and taking our hairdressing jobs. But, that's a very populistic thing that people can say. But it's very important for us to realize that India is already a world power. It will rapidly become one of the major economies in the world. Some analysts believe that 2050 it will be one, if not the second largest economy in the world. It is on its way. It has, in my view, a visionary leader, and there are some bold steps that have been taken. The economy is growing at 7.5%. It has all the inherent safeguards, though not perfect, rule of law, democracy, etc., which is essential for long-term sustainable growth. And we sit 20 kilometers south of it. And unless we have a small market, so unless we find a clever way of plugging into the value chain that is India, right, we will miss the opportunity. Right? There's no point in us, in my opinion, looking at our market all the time. We got to look at the larger market which is next door. Now, the way to look at it is to get entry through well thought out economic agreements which allow us entry into those markets. They may not be perfect, but also the other thing about this is that India will grow whatever we do. there is very little that we can do
Yeah.
that will hamper the growth in India. But if we are smart about it, and India has also geopolitically, in my personal view, rather tenuous relationships with almost all its neighbors. And they are looking forward to a friendly neighbor like Sri Lanka to have a, what shall I say, a copybook friendly relationship. So that's really one advantage that we have, which we should actually maximize, because we are a small economy. So I think basically we need to plug into this Indian story, whether it is through EDCA or through something else is a different matter. I think just these labels are irrelevant, right?
Yeah.
So, and we also have, sitting here, an excellent tourism market for Indians. You know, the Indians have a massive middle class, 150 million people who can spend a lot of money. And Sri Lanka is a very pleasant place for tourism. So Indian tourism is also equally important. So my short question is that we need to, if you take India and the region, you know, we need to plug into their value chains.
Value chain.
And whether it be manufacturing, whether it be technology, whether it be services, that's one way of going, and that will be a big section of our economy. If we do it properly, it will fuel 1 or 2% of our growth.
Yeah. Good. Also, other panelists, if you have any comments or questions you want to jump in, just feel free to just let me know.
I don't want to mention names, but I'll tell you where we are really scary of Indian interventions and things. But take, for example, few companies that came to Sri Lanka from India. We really competed with them and chased, more or less they are not doing well. Telecom sector, one biggest Indian company came here, what happened?
Yeah.
Because banks came here, and we thought banks will be closed here because of their process and things. That bank is not doing well. Then take, for example, hospital that came here. So what happened? They are no longer to be seen, but Sri Lankan hospitals improved. So you can, list is going on. But
So we shouldn't be afraid of competition.
Yeah. I think India is, again, we are false. The psycho problem is there, but I think we can compete with India.
And,
also
and by
if we really want.
2020, we'll have South Asia as a whole, will have 2 billion people, 25% of the population. And potentially Sri Lanka could become the friendly neighbor for all those countries, not just India.
Well, that's for sure. For all the SAARC countries, we are the friendly neighbor. Nobody will like to work with the other party.
Yeah.
We take it.
So, Rajita, from an export perspective, Sri Lankan companies have been very successful entering Bangladesh, at least relatively successful. But India, we have not cracked the nut there. We have tried, large companies have tried, and to a large degree failed. Why is that?
Yes, I think, just to add on to the previous point, I think with regard to free trade with India, already we have the free trade agreement for the goods in place, right? So we can monitor the effectiveness of that program. But again, I think I would like to simplify this into a kind of a bargaining chip, right? So when you negotiate a bilateral agreement, so your bargaining positions matter a lot, right? So you are bargaining with your big brother, very high growth country and a very high economic power station. And you're bargaining from a lesser position. And also we need to be careful of the players of the bargaining. Mr. Modi is an exemplary leader with a vision. And he is going for flawless execution and is getting the country in order. And if you look at the ministries of India now, just look at the secretaries that have been appointed in the Indian government and the cabinet. You need to be very smart in this. So you have a very strong bureaucracy, very strong economic power, and you need to match, in some sense, from the Sri Lankan side, that bargaining power. So we need to have, in this bargaining process, very smart people doing it, understanding the ramifications, whilst overall it can be a very positive exercise. especially when it comes to the technology and also the economic collaborations, particularly opening up, because there are, as Manu said, there are a lot of, at the moment, doubt about what the exact arrangements or framework is going to be. You need to be mindful of this situation, how the teams of bargaining and the bargaining positions, and to carve out in a smart way that we do not compromise our individual positions. I mean, the panel gave some good examples of exceptions. Yeah. And then from an export point of view, I mean, we know there are few successful, I would like to first touch on the investments. There are only few companies who have been successful in manufacturing, establishing manufacturing in India. One reason is, India is smart in most of the things that they do. They have a very strong manufacturing base. And they are technologically, they are much superior in terms of having that advantage. So you need to again find niches. Now, for example, Brandix have been there. There are various other companies who have gone in. And in fact, Hekab attempted once, it was a bad experience for us, to establish one of the largest facilities in northern India. At that time, they were fairly, politically it was very unstable for us to do that. The relationship was not good with the Tamil Nadu government. So I would say from a exporter's point of view, I think it need to look at it in two ways. One is, where can we find the niches in the Indian market? For example, will there be a niche, if you look at the export of our products, the tea. What are other value-added exports that we can target? For example, for our industry, we don't see any purpose in India because India is one of the largest producers of coconut carbon. They are one of the largest. So it has come to a point that virtually they're dumping activated carbon in the market and they are a big price regulator. So it's extremely competitive for us to go into India. But there are certain specific niches that we could find. But in this exercise, we need to be very, very cautious. And I would recommend that more of a phased out. You test the ground, move on. You test your ground, move on. Cautiously move on the extension of the free trade arrangements.
Good. Yeah, I mean, your initial point about having good trade negotiators is a very critical point. I mean, just the anecdotal thing about the recent Chinese delegation, the Sri Lanka delegation went to China to do a trade deal. And, you know, our guy said, we do this much of exports. Then the Chinese delegate said, yeah, but it's not this number, it's this number because you're not taking into account the number of gems and what their Chinese tourists coming here and purchasing gems, spices and tea. That is also counted as exports from their perspective. So they have gone to the extent of calculating that number and saying this is the amount of benefit that they give. So that's the level of analytics and information that yes.
I mean, one more point is how transparent the Indian government has become in terms of giving access to the investors. Now, if you look at the FDI flow to India is going to be one of the highest in the world. It's going to estimated at about $31 billion. And if you look at what Mr. Modi has done to make this government so transparent, I mean, it has gone to the extent that if anybody who cannot have the access to the secretaries or the ministries, I mean, there are very special kind of mobile numbers that have been given. I mean, there are rules of engagement in terms of email correspondence that has been given. Digitization of the whole process and the barriers of technology, I mean, kind of the bureaucracy is being very, in a fast phase, is taken out. So he's making the Indian investment climate so friendly and so accessible. And imagine that doing with such a large country, with so much of diverse income disparity, the India cannot speak of the strength of Sri Lanka having such high social indices. But that one change in the government, and probably it is a flow from the previous government as well, it is really modernizing and making the governance so efficient in such a difficult situation. So I think the anecdote here is, I mean, if India can do, why cannot we?
Yeah, a large bureaucracy like India can do, why can't we do it? Good. So before we end this kind of round on the global thing, Dee, I just want to kind of get your thoughts on what are the key technology trends, global technology trends that we need to be aware of, especially in the next coming year, that our companies that we should adapt from an adaptation perspective, and just general key trends like blockchain and others that we should be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, there are a large number of trends that started sort of pre-2000 onwards that are carrying on, some of which have gathered significant momentum and made significant difference. So if I touch on few, digitization of enterprise is a key theme, which is underpinned by a number of other technology trends. So for example, mobile effect of the mobilization or mobiles in the workplace. Cloud computing is another one. Big data and analytics is another, and social, all those social media that we have is another, enhancing those. So if I go into a couple of those, for example, mobile practices in workplace is making a significant impact to the enterprises, both from CapEx and OpEx perspective. For example, build your own devices. It wasn't taken seriously up until a year or so ago. Now, everybody owns a device, it's an Android or Apple or something like that. We'd all like to use our own device if possible to do work as well as our private things. Why not make use of it? Companies have gotten on to this fact and enabling that build your own devices type of thing. These are simple but very effective measures that can make a significant impact. At percentage terms, I think something like I saw 35% growth in this bring your own devices. 38% of the global companies probably move by 2019 to build your own devices type of way of operating. What this also does is it gives rise to other companies who operate this in this area. For example, how do you secure such devices is a problem. So Mobile Line, and there are various other players who have come up to enable that, and we have opportunities in areas like that, which is not hugely dominated by large players. But then on the other hand, there are enterprise applications that now needs to operate on those mobile devices, so therefore that's an opportunity as well, and that's largely happening. Cloud computing is another theme, actually, that's making a significant impact to the businesses. It gives the business the flexibility, the agility to respond to changing market demands without having to significantly, outlay capital expenditure to build one's own IT infrastructure. Those things, it's not switch on, switch off. One can't move to cloud computing overnight, but we have to seriously think about how we take advantage of those if they're available. And a lot of the companies in sort of European and North American companies are doing so, including the financial industry, who's very reticent to do it because of the security implications. Actually, when you look at cloud computing landscape, the security is much better than, for example, owning one's own IT infrastructure. So it's slightly counterintuitive. So mobile computing is another one. Given the big data growth of what we call big data, which is sets of large amount of data that one's sitting on, and leveraging that using analytics is another key theme. That one has lots of stories that, supermarkets putting beers next to nappies, for example. Stories like that, which are key insights that looking at customer behaviors, how you actually mine that data for you to be profitable. Amazon is a key example, and that's exactly what they do. They've been very profitable in doing that. Even in small ways, people talk about analytics, people think, hey, it's not for me because I have no idea what to do and how do I even go about doing it. Actually, fairly good statistics and computing graduate these days come out of university, knows how to actually find data patterns and help you with it. So you can, start in small ways. So analytics and big data is another trend. Another huge global trend, I think, really poised for growth, and also Sri Lanka should potentially look at, is Internet of Things. These days, any object, even an animal, farm animal, can be can be digitized in a way that one can extract certain information out of those devices, houses, cars, and animals, and you can build services on these. That's significantly advanced in the global marketplace, and it's the growth forecasts are staggering. I mean, we are talking, if I remember correctly, 2015, the total market expenditure, or the market size of IoT was something like $422 billion. That's in 2015. And then it's forecast to grow to something like $2 trillion globally. You can imagine the growth, and the number of devices connected, again, exponential growth, something like $50 billion by 2020. And there are pockets of activity in these areas, but that's the key area. Actually, it doesn't need huge amounts of expenditure to be able to get into these industries. So
So what you're saying is Sri Lanka has the opportunity to kind of leapfrog some of these, some of the other technologies and get into mobile technology, cloud computing, IoT. Are the three kind
and
and big data analytics, yes.
Yeah.
So those four.
Leapfrog is actually an interesting way of looking at it. One has to, I think. I think we're at a point where if we don't do some of these things within the next 5 years, that particular boat would have sailed in a number of places like India and various others. They're trying to do the same thing. One of the things that's world is not very aware of at the moment is Eastern European bloc has got they're trying to do these things, and it's coming up. Lithuania, even Ukraine, places like that are extremely smart people who are trying to figure things out.
Right.
If we don't actually get in and do things like this, I fear we'll miss the opportunity.
Good, great, thank you. So with that, we'll kind of move into the Sri Lanka. I know there's an interesting question from Mano there, but you can choose to answer it with this next question, Mano, I kind of posed to you, which was Lakshman's central theme today, is what will be the economic business climate outlook for 2017? Is it a growth outlook?
I think basically my own view is that we have a few things that we got to look at. One is I think we are having a rather high plateau of interest rates at the moment. My own estimation is that will probably continue in the short term. When I say short term, 6 months or so. But I really don't see it going northwards anytime soon, and hopefully it will start stabilizing and dropping once these inflows that the government is talking about hopefully comes through. Number two is that we need to be cognizant of the fact that the US Fed rates are probably going up rather soon, and that will trigger some degree of inward flow into the US of money, and we may have some effect of that in terms of FDI and other inflows probably into the stock market. I'm not too sure of the statistics there at the moment. So in the coming year, we will hopefully see a plateauing of interest rates. We will hopefully see government stabilizing its borrowing, because if the budget is passed as is without too many amendments, I think we can be somewhat hopeful that revenues will go up. We will see obviously some cost push inflation in the short term, but I think the stabilization phase of debt repayment and that has happened over the last year or so will probably get simpler. So I think we have a fair platform to launch our businesses. So I think we'll be looking at sort of stable interest rates, probably dropping towards the end of next year, and hopefully some stable government policies on taxation, which will allow us to plan slightly ahead. So I'm fairly optimistic, but the key to this will be the ability of the government to attract FDI.
Right.
And on that question, I would say the jury is still out. Yeah. I think the country has all the necessary sort of environment for that to happen. But again, also depending on one of these questions that are being asked, implementation will become key. And without significant improvement in efficiencies and implementations, FDI has so many other places to go. Finally, I feel that that it's important that the government concentrates on actually increasing efficiency in its own delivery services so that it makes business a little easier to do. And I would also like some clear sort of proposals to come through on things like capital market development, which has been absent, at least in the short term in the past. So hopefully we'll have the right environment fiscally to take it forward.
You mentioned about Fed rates going up, and today's exchange rate, buying rate was 147 rupees per dollar. Where do you see over 2017?
As we were talking earlier, we probably won't see it sort of rising dramatically, but I think it will. My own feeling is that it will hover between the high 140s and probably on a few days will touch around 150. I don't actually also see it strengthening significantly. So I think we have a band that will be in the high 140s. However, Sri Lanka is a small market, and sometimes large individual transactions or events can have an impact. I'm concerned though of two things. One is that there has been some signs of remittances dropping, which account for, I think, even now some $7 to $8 billion. And the export performance has been mixed, to say the least. So hopefully, things like GSP Plus can be put under our belt. And for that, I think the background conditions have to be met, and I think the government is well poised to meet those conditions if they so desire. So hopefully some things like that will add on to export performance. I mean, maybe Rajitha can talk a little bit more about exports.
Sure.
I'm a little concerned that it has actually not, I think there is a drop overall, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
So Vajra, I mean, so this exchange, and it's good to hear that your forecast, so to speak, is a good consistency in the 147, 145, 150 bracket, which is the key for FDI coming in. For repatriation of dollars, exchange control risk is mitigated. Is that something, Vajra, do you agree with that assessment?
I also think so. What he said is right about 140 is late, towards 150, it's the figures, it won't go much unless there is some black swan comes this way.
So Vajra, an often asked question from you, I'm sure in forums these days is, yesterday's stock market hit an 8-month low. So, one would have thought with the budget giving some fiscal discipline in terms of addressing the balance of payment issue, that investors would be optimistic about the budget. But looks like it has gone the other way. Why?
Yeah. Before that, I'll explain why a capital market is required to country. Now, somebody will ask why this fuss about helping the capital market. Now, if you say 20 years ago maybe, banks used to do everything. Banks used to give risk capital, banks used to give venture capital, banks used to give private equity, they used to underwrite IPOs, they used to do IPOs also, and everything was, you used to go to bank and get it done. What happened subsequently, and some countries thought that capital market is not required. For example, Germany thought that capital market is not required, they can develop. But they gave a lot of powers to banks to do these things. What is happening now is that with the risk weighted assets coming into the scene and Basel 2, 3 coming in, banks' role is now going to be limited. World's biggest buildings were owned by banks those days. Now what is happening is it's given to capital market. they are going to REITs. They are transferred to REITs and said, okay, general public own this one, I'll rent it out. So why is that is happening? Because banks have become, capital become so scarce,
Right.
and their business is all about managing capital. So capital market has to play a huge role, both to the banks as well as certain areas where banks cannot play. Private equity, venture capital, infrastructure funds, unit trust, mutual funds, all has to play a role in the capital market to go forward. Banks cannot play that role alone now. You can see what is happening to Germany, which started Deutsche Bank, is now in trouble because they played that role in the capital market, and bank can be in trouble if they start playing those roles. So capital market is a must. So government should have supported, some support should come to the capital market to develop it, because that will help them. Long-term debt has to be there to develop infrastructure. Aging population needs annuities. Without annuities, these people cannot live one day. So they need pension schemes. And for that, long-term debt is required. So there is a development stage that we should support. Now you can ask, taxation is the only way. Taxation is one way of supporting. There are other ways of supporting, like for example, allowing government institutions to list in the capital market. So that will help to boost. So there are a lot of ways government can support. But I think one question was asked whether taxation is, yes, taxation is one of the support that you can give. Not only Sri Lanka, it's Singapore. Many capital markets that are now leading the world gave tax concessions initially to develop the capital market. And we cannot be exception. So we should give some unit trust in India, UTA, Unit Trust of India, UTI, was given a government guarantee. It's just like a National Savings Bank, UTI. Unit Trust industry was developed in India. Now there's no support. Templeton, everybody is working there. That was developed initially by giving a government guarantee to Unit Trust of India. So that is how these things are developed. So some concessions should be given. Unfortunately, in this budget, what has happened is they have taken the level playing field out of it also. Now they are punishing the capital market. Now withholding tax is 14%. Unit trusts are taxed at something like 36%. Nobody understands why banks are given withholding tax of 5%, and whoever comes to unit trust individually is taxed at 26%. So the unit trust industry is going to be over if this taxation continues. Similarly, debentures. They are given a punishment. Okay, I gave you a tax concession. One bank asked me this. One leading bank asked me this. We gave concessions to you. You enjoy concessions. Now you have to be other way around. Both are two mistakes won't make one correct decision. One thing, but concessions are given, gradually removed, but create a level playing field, because capital market is required for this market to Sri Lankan economy to proceed.
Yeah, good. So there's a bunch of questions about, I'm just summarizing a number of questions out here about, and directed towards Mano and Vajira, on that the present government has been in power for 2 years, and what is the report card on them, right? To kind of summarize all the sentiments that are out there in the...
Let's take the direct ones. One says, you don't mind if I read that?
You can read it.
Do you think that the current BOI needs to be revamped to make it more efficient and investor friendly? With due apologies to my friend who is the chairman of the BOI, I have a long held the view that BOI should be scrapped altogether. So that's that answer, right? Then another one says, jury is still out. After 24 months, current regime has not shown any progress. That's a rather general question. But I, on a more serious note, I think there are lots of lessons to learn. One is that decisions, I think I mean, this is not relevant to this government, but it has been a problem every time there is successive governments. And we should be proud of the fact that we do regularly change regimes, though some regimes appear to be more impregnable than the others. And in doing so, one of the mistakes we make is we throw the baby out with the bathwater, you know. just because there is a new regime doesn't mean everything that the previous regime has done is not correct. So we go through this whole process of starting again. And I think this is not this time, it has been last time, and maybe 15, 20 years down the line. So I think one point is that you have to be careful, especially when it comes to economic matters. Because if you take FDI, for instance, I'm not holding a can for anybody. I mean, the foreign direct investments is essentially long term.
Yeah.
They span many governments. And one thing they need is to know that there is a consistency in the policy. Otherwise, they cannot plan. So if you have situations where, whether rightly or wrongly, whether they were given or not is not my business, but if somebody has put in money here based on some sort of concessions, right, it is extremely unfair and does a lot of damage if midway through the conditions are changed.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, these guys are running businesses. They have to show returns to their shareholders. So when you have that short-term volatility of the game plan being changed after they have signed the agreement, their risk profile of the country goes up. So either they won't invest in the future, or they will postpone their expansion, or they will cut corners to recover what they are now have to pay. So we have to be very careful. I think that every government makes this mistake, that renegotiating investment deals have to be done very carefully, because the long-term impact is quite significant. And once people lose confidence, it's very difficult to bring it back. So if we are now, let's say in Wajira's area, if you are now promoting the stock market on a basis of some incentives, you can't have 1 year one thing being taken out, another year something being put back. It doesn't help anybody. And also, so I think governments must take that into account. Now, with regard to many ministries, that of course is a bit of a plague that we are suffering from for a long time. That is entirely political, so I agree with
that's the inefficiency in the system.
Yeah, and
so,
also political reality also, but I totally agree. I mean, in another area on the...
So what do you think in terms of, you mentioned continuity in policy, is that the critical component there is to really separate the central bank and...
No, I think it's very important. My own view is that, countries outside are giving more independence to central banks. I understand that people have different models.
Yeah, and Federal Reserve in the US is completely independent.
Yeah, now Japan has a different system, but they are moving away, moving the central bank into more, so, going against the tide is not a good idea.
Yeah.
My point is there must be consistency if we agree as a country that we need FDI. I mean, that's one of the first things we have to agree, no? We have to agree that we need foreign direct investment. If we basically agree, then I think there must be consistency and there must be protection of law against changing these goalposts, because we are actually shooting ourselves in the foot.
Okay.
That's why we lose the confidence. Yeah. And it's not easy, because there are many more destinations that anybody can go.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a competitive market.
Absolutely,
We are competing.
Absolutely.
Dee, from an international perspective, living in London, what is the perspective from an international investor looking at local capital markets?
Well, to be honest, I couldn't agree more with what Vajira said. He's very aptly summarized it. I mean, for Sri Lanka to go from a low middle income country to a higher middle income country, let's set targets, right? You cannot overnight become an America or a UK. One has to go incrementally. Let's say if that's the first incremental step, one has to start with capital markets. All these problems about FDI and various other things, the capital inflows can only be facilitated by actually strengthening the capital markets. The problem we have is we don't have enough listings, and no disrespect to what's happening in the stock exchange, is doing a great job under trying circumstances in Sri Lanka, but we really need to increase the listings and the capital inflows. It has a number of effects, because if you look at one of the questions that's been asked is, we have one third of population is digital, why can't we be a digital player? Well, two things I can immediately think of. knowledge and investment. Investment as in capital availability. Why is capital not available? Actually, capital markets are not efficient enough to have the capital in here. If you have inward investment,
Very good point,
and that injects capital into nascent companies, and they have ability to, rather than walking into a bank, to raise capital in other ways, and then whole economy and the whole ecosystem grows. So that is really the perspective. There are players who wants to invest in these, who will take bets in small companies. I mean, there are venture capitalists who will play a number of cards, hoping that one or two will pan out. And within those number of cards, we could easily feature. But how would you go about investing in? There's no exposure, there's no capital market infrastructure. Funds would not come in because it's too small, the big ones. So I think we really have to look at the capital, at the risk of sounding tiresome. I couldn't agree more. Again, another one is why can't we? Dubai and Singapore started with nothing. I wouldn't quite put Dubai and Singapore in the same bracket, because Dubai had some natural resources, so to speak, and therefore lots of other ways to do stuff. But Singapore is an interesting one, again, what you talked about. That Singapore went from where it was to where it is purely because of the strength of the capital markets and what they've done. So
if one thing to take away is we have to lobby the government to help the capital markets, not punish the capital markets.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, good.
At least if they are not helping, not to damage the market. That's a good thing.
I think the important thing is inconsistency.
Yeah.
That must be stamped out. That's the issue. If you know the rules of the game, then it's easier to play. But halfway in the match, if the rules of the games change, then we have a problem.
No, I'll tell you another classic example is capital gains. No, capital gains that year didn't come also. Actually, the damage was done. One minister went and said, capital gains.
Yeah, without it being implemented or even actual be a law, it was. Yeah.
So the market was damaged. Now, however much you go to foreigners, how can you do a roadshow? Now, the question was asked from me, why aren't you going to do roadshows? We used to do it up to 2014, we did one. 15 also we did one. But going there and saying, is capital gains coming? How can you answer? If I cannot answer that one, no more presentations.
Yeah.
That's a basic question they will have, is there capital gains? Because capital gains is what they are coming for.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the young economists who sat here very eloquently articulated one of the key things businesses are looking for, whether it's local or international, is the stability in the system, right? Investors, that's what you look for. And in an investment climate, the stability in the capital markets, fair certainty as in how it operates, certainty in the capital markets, and the certainty in the economic factors. So that's the climate one has to create in order to get the investments coming in.
Yeah. So from an export perspective, how do you see the budget and the government policies for 2017?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the current year's performance to start as a baseline, the exports are not doing at all, well at all. So there is a year-on-year decline if you look at from a growth rate point of view. And if you look at the total exports of Sri Lanka, probably this year we will end up with about something like $11 to $12 billion, which is about 13 to 14% of the GDP. Now we need to start from here. Now, a year ago, Chamber had a theme called towards 50 billion export economy. And that was almost 2 years ago. So now, 2015, our exports were at the same value. So in US dollar terms, it is not growing. I mean, it's at the same level. So we need to really look at what will ignite this base, right? For next year, if you look at, we don't expect the majority of the growth is going to come from the exports. The GDP growth is expected at best somewhere between 5.5% to 6%. Export climate is not good because if you start from a global scenario, the challenges are more. So if you ask what can be done, the first thing is we need to identify sustainable export industries and truly apply this sustainability into practice. Now, for example, just to bring some of the success stories from HECAB, we have been successful in the exports so far, primarily we have concentrated on customer-initiated, value-driven, innovation-related exports. So it's very, very important for us to, in this current global climate, bring the customer interface into our value-added process and also to fuel our innovation in the exports. So there are a lot of companies who are doing this. I mean, benchmark companies in Sri Lanka, for example, if you look at MAS, Brandix in the garment field, they're really thriving on that. And the customer relationship, because you are looking at the West and you are looking at the East, it's in order to bring this seamless value chain where the investments or the other customers can shift from Sri Lanka to any other competitive grounds like Bangladesh, Vietnam or Myanmar. These are newly competing countries with us for our exports. So we need to have a very strong tap with the customers and bring this customer-driven innovation into the Sri Lankan soil. And then the other key aspect is how do you secure your supply chain? The supply chain integrations are going to be very, very important. And both the backward and the forward integration has paid off very well for our successes in the last couple of years. Then how do you basically get the productivity of the exports? It's going to be very, very competitive. And how do you get our costs down? So sophisticated practices, I mean, the philosophies like lean need to come in. These are practices that we are adopting in order to bring quality-driven, but yet more productive export competitiveness. And then the ability for us to regionalize, I think this is very important, because whilst we look at the export footprint from a domestic manufacturing base, it's very, very important for us to regionalize the manufacturing bases. There are a lot of companies, for example, HECAB, 60% of our manufacturing is in Indonesia and Thailand. Customers want that, and customers want that, the footprint of the manufacturing for risk mitigation, and also for us to manage the supply chain effectively, that regionalization is very important. And globalization in the markets, a true globalization and bringing the marketing expertise to Sri Lanka, that's going to be very vital for our export growth. And then, what can be done in the short term to fuel the investments? For example, FDI, if you look at, we are struggling to make $1 billion FDI mark this year, $1 billion. And countries like, say, Myanmar or Thailand, Bangladesh, couple of times, 5 times, 6 times more FDIs are coming in. We have to look at, rather than there's a question about whether it's the vision or the implementation, I think there are so many plans, so many vision statements. I think what we are lacking is the implementation. The execution is all about execution. So what are the low-hanging fruits? Just look at the impending power crisis in Sri Lanka. By 2018, we are going to be in darkness, and we are talking about an export-led economy. The second coal power plant that should have come on board by 2018 is taken out. That's a Trincomalee project. Then LNG program is scrapped, or rather we don't see the birth of that in the near future. So we are sitting at 4,000 gigawatt capacity today. We would need by 2030 about 6,000 gigawatt of capacity. And immediately for the next 2 years, we don't have a pragmatic plan. So why should a very heavy industrial-based export industry should look at Sri Lanka in this current situation? Just take one single factor. If you don't have reliability of power, availability of power, the quality of power, and the competitiveness of the power. So we lack that. Yeah. So just one example, if you want to fuel, because we need to jumpstart this very quickly for us to say, if you are looking at 3rd years, 4th years from now, export growth, we need to have these FDIs in at least next 2 to 3 years' time. Mm-hmm. So power plant, from a, Mano will know this very well, from an initial proposal stage to implementation, commissioning, it would take at least 3 years for a 300 megawatt plant. So it's the execution that we lack. We have so many plans.
Plans are plenty, execution is the problematic thing. In this very optimistic scenario that you guys are painting for us here, what are the growth sectors that investors should be looking at? Vajra, maybe you can give a
No, I think one point we are missing, a few points. One is the peace in Sri Lanka. No country can be boasting about peace aspect as much as we can do. For last so many years, there's nothing happening. So we should protect it. That's the one thing. Second one is that on that we can build a lot of things. If you want, tourism is one aspect. Second one is there was one question asked about health tourism. But if you go on Emirates flight, they give an interview with one head of Emirates, how they are going to do health tourism in Dubai. From the time you arrive, you are collected by a person or put into ambulance, taken to hospital. Immediately insurance is given. If some complications come in, you are airlifted to London or something. All aspects of the problems are looked after. So that's what we should do.
Yeah.
I think our doctors are extremely good. We have very good hospitals. But that aspect has to be covered properly. Everything has to be looked into for somebody to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So that's what other benefit we have is the location. Location, logistics. China is coming not for fun because of the location. There may be many other countries, many other investors who want to come, but there should be land available. They should not be harassed by them. There was a very good project, if Mano will remember, I don't know, there are a lot of great circles pass through Sri Lanka. Planes can take over Sri Lanka. No need of getting down. It's just passing through Sri Lanka. Great circles is the shortest distance from two countries. Only thing we need is to manage the air. If you manage the air in a reliable manner, planes will take this route.
Otherwise planes will come down.
Otherwise planes will meet with each other in somewhere mid-air. So if you can give a reliable management, that's about, if I remember right, at that 2001, it was about 20 million to 30 million US dollar investment.
Right.
But you have to have Lufthansa, some very good investor coming in here and putting it. Then they will pay you just to use the air. So these are the businesses that we can do.
It's like a toll road, right? Yeah.
And these are God-given. Nobody can take it from us.
So it's very interesting. So what you're saying is tourism and logistics are the two key sectors, location-based businesses.
And with peace, education, everything you can do.
Yeah.
But more than that, I think it's location-based business. Logistics is the main thing that you can do.
And the point you make about peace is something that we take for granted. And it's something that most of the world is in chaos. In the big, if you take India, there is uncertainty from
Bangladesh, the problem that happened.
Bangladesh, Thailand, US, all these countries are having. So this is something that we need to maintain. I don't know, Mano is working on a different project there, but we will not touch on that. In terms of just looking inwardly, maybe if you talk about people, Sri Lanka's biggest issue in this new environment of high taxes, cost of operating a business is high. So we have to look at productivity. And I think companies should also look at internally, and people, we should look at how do we increase worker productivity. With productivity in Sri Lanka is relatively low compared to other countries. That coupled with the millennials coming into the workforce who are not, they are not, there's no loyalty, they like the work-life balance, they're a completely different mindset. How are companies like yours, Mano, adapting to this new reality?
I think from Rajita can add on the manufacturing side, and maybe Dee can talk about the ICT sector. But basically what I find is that we are having a real difficulty in attracting good middle management. There is a problem. I think Part of it is because I think people have gone overseas and the place has become much more global in terms of employment, etc. But attracting middle to senior management has been difficult. Now, positive side of that story is that they are in such demand and they're difficult to find, but I think there is an issue there. So we are finding it, I mean, not only us, I think around most people are finding it difficult. And the other point I have is that true, we have high literacy rates, high social indicators, but whether we are training the bulk of our youth in the areas that they need to be trained is a good question. Now, I noticed with some interest a newspaper article, I think today or yesterday, where the finance minister has made some comments about trishaw drivers, To some extent, I tend to agree with him, because this is, while I accept that trishaws are the poor man's transport, and not poor man's, I mean most people's convenient transport, the question is whether we are driving our youth into completely untrained, unskilled, basically jobs, and thereby depriving ourselves of that entire generation. Because it's basically, it's a fun job, doesn't need much. There's enough money on a day-to-day basis to manage. It drives other undesirable things as well, but of course it provides transport. But this is a question. So I think my point is whether we are training our youth in the right areas is I think, a good question. So
Absolutely. And I think your point about middle management, that companies here are having a huge shortage of good middle managers, is an important one. We talk about tourist sector not having enough staff, but this is not a gap that we've addressed
I want
much.
to add something to that. I think, again, with peace and with the present government being here, a lot of countries are willing to help us on this aspect. Education is one thing any country would like to help another country, because they know it will remain somewhere. So education is where we can get a lot of support. We can start joint ventures, government to government type. Libraries are very easy to know. You can just plug into a library and take information, books and things. So you can do a lot of things related to education and training using this background that we have got. We are friendly with everybody now. So you can go to Switzerland, Western countries, other side, America, go and ask for help. They will give it. Because they know that this is the easiest way to help a country.
I think from a manufacturing perspective, how are manufacturing jobs, from a worker productivity perspective?
I mean, definitely, I think we'll need to redefine this more of a value productivity than from the cost productivity point of view. I think we need to bring the whole equation of this entire value chain, how we can optimize the value per employee of a company. So that need to be integrated into the customer-centric approach and the value stream. So in order to optimize, it's basically, if you look at from a manufacturing segment where the factories are located outside of Colombo, say Western province, there is a severe shortage of the operators. So this, at the moment, one of the reasons is that the three-wheeler issue, particularly driving the youth away from the employment. And the garment industry is facing a scarce, acute problem on the operator level. So the Sri Lankan companies will need to look at automation. That is one of the things that we are looking at. Basically, most of the mundane and the kind of the mechanized work, the work that can be mechanized, to be automated. So that is one answer to this issue. The second thing is, I mean, even if you look at, again, from Haley's point of view, I think from a plantation, again, this productivity, I think the one good thing that has happened this time particularly on the wage negotiations for the estate sector, I think for the first time there is a productivity base, some understanding, but how we implement is a question. So at least from that level, where the very difficult trade unions, we have found certain way out. And even our companies, through the collective bargaining, we have gone year on year on productivity-based improvements. And in terms of the management caliber, because I think there are a couple of answers, because we need to look at the generation, millennium generation, and the generation, different generations that have come in. And we need to provide this flexible employment arrangement for the management. And also, we need to tap into the digitalization and the internet-based resources that are existent to make, because there is a huge pool of Sri Lankan experts living around the world. I mean, for that matter, for any nationality. So there can be, I mean, companies, Sri Lankan companies need to adapt itself or change themselves to look at flexible arrangement, more on consultancy arrangement, more consultants handling the marketing, the globalization of their operations. And then for companies like ours, where the regional manufacturing is set up, we need mobility of the middle and the senior management to go into other countries and get the experience. So so from a company's perspective, I think it's the human capital management, and need to change, take a different view of the new generations, and have very flexible arrangements. And the other thing is the very few Sri Lankan companies have good profit sharing, and the ownership of the companies, I think the Sri Lankan...
like key ESOPs and ESOPs,
yeah,
good. Yeah.
That plus the kind of, I think, real performance-based, profit-based incentives included in their scheme, so that they are...
And that begs the question to list it in the markets where you can actually provide good key ESOP schemes. And your fact about hiring consultants is music to my ears.
Yeah, now, for example, just to let everybody know, now, for example, just look at the power of, say, LinkedIn, I mean, these professional websites. I mean, I have started using this, say, 2-3 years ago, and I mean, through this LinkedIn, I've been able to canvas some of the global clients without even having a phone call with them initially. But of course, you need to follow up with the call and a meeting thereafter. Sure. But initial introduction to some of the global companies, key customers, is within your smartphone. So we need to also, I mean, sometimes the problem in Sri Lanka is like, for example, we are also having another problem Sri Lanka has is more and more senior management is of more than 50 years, for example, right? And this is the global trend. And you see in the company boards, there are more and more people now above 60 and some above 70s. I mean, that's nothing wrong in that, because the quality of life improves, but we need to change of our practices.
Kind of adapt to new generations. So I think we have 5 more minutes. I just want to have a lightning round. Yes, just one word answers from the panel. First question is, and we can go from Rajita downwards. In your opinion, what is the best policy initiative that the government has implemented that would help us grow in the next 2 or 3 years? One policy initiative or one policy initiative.
Yeah, I think in terms of...
one word.
Very difficult to find one word. I think I believe the consensual approach. I mean, if I put two words to that, okay. I mean, consensual approach, but within limits. I mean, it should not be too consensual.
Right.
But
so kind of discourse and coming up with Mano.
One word difficult. So
no, okay. You can have a
I think to work at peace, because that's an essential ingredient to all what we are talking about.
Working towards peace.
That's one successful policy.
Yeah. What's the most successful policy that will help?
I think foreign policy is the one that...
foreign policy?
That will have our, whatever, we can build on that.
So we are building a good relations across the board. Do you have an...
I think ease of doing business.
Ease of doing business?
Is a key one. I mean, I saw, sorry to add a couple of more words to this, I saw some stats about how many initiatives, ease of doing business initiatives Sri Lanka implemented, which is actually compared to the other countries, much more,
Right.
like 12 or something like that. I think we should do more.
So that the focus on that. What's the worst policy?
My comment is not a policy, but I think inconsistency.
Inconsistency.
I unwrite that one.
And I would say, further than that, contradictions.
Contradictions, inconsistency.
I think one of the key things, again, I'm not well versed with the political arena here, but the communication of consistent message is somewhat lacking. I think consistent
Communication.
is poor.
Okay, so
they're not doing the communication well. I mean, if you
Right.
look at some of the Western governments, they're pretty good at actually getting the message across. That
Right.
could be
Good,
quite
good.
significant.
So consistency, communication, and what was the other one? Contradictions. Good. On that note, thanks panel, great panel and a great discussion. Thank you.
Okay, time to wrap up. Yeah, that's interesting. 3 C's. Consistency, contradiction. That's another C.
Communication. Communication.
Communication. That reminds me President Premadas's famous 3. Consensus, compromise,
Consultation.
consultation, compromise,
Yeah.
consultation, compromise,
Consensus.
consensus.
Yeah.
Okay, somebody raised a valid question. Of course, I responded to it. Why this, whatever we discuss in our summits, conferences, are not communicated to the right people? Okay, we have been hosting these events for the last 17 years. We probably have over 200. We make every possible effort to bring 3 parties: private sector, academia, and the policymakers and the bureaucracy. We have not always been very successful. Only one event, that is the infrastructure summit, we find a greater participation of public sector. That is because just 3 people. Nana Mavil Madam from Megapolis and RDA Director General Swarna and UDA Sumedha Ratnayaka. Okay. Otherwise, Treasury never comes here. Okay. Central banks on and off. So it's almost impossible, to create, not impossible. We keep trying that. We are not given up. But it's tough because our bureaucracy is not used for discourse. 2 reasons. They're scared of their jobs. They don't openly talk. Unfortunately, Dr. Nandal Vigasin is out of the country, otherwise he would have been here. And he speaks his mind openly. But generally, public sector people, particularly because they worked under a certain regime for 10 years, they simply don't want to come out and talk openly. That is one problem we have. Other is just apathy. They are not used for that, what we discuss, consultation here. So those are the challenges we have. But our primary purpose is not really to influence the policy. We try to do that. In the past, we have influenced the policy through LBO. During former one of the governor's time, we consistently, criticize and gave objective analysis about the monetary policy, and that actually worked. And the government official printing press, that is central bank, slowed down, and that had a tremendous impact on economy. So we have achieved some success. But what is most important thing is our commitment is to the private sector. That it is our duty as a media company to make sure that our private sector is informed of the challenges and opportunities so they can make, proper business decisions. So that's what we really try to aim at. And luckily we have all these wonderful people coming from the industry taking part and donating their time. So ladies and gentlemen, we had a long day. And as I said, this particular conference, unfortunately, we don't get many people, unlike other conferences where we get over 300, sometimes 400, because this is end of the year. There's 2 things. One is there is a conference fatigue, and the other is, people are wrapping up their annual work before they go on vacations. So we had a very productive and interesting day. Started with the discussing, whole morning was spent on discussing the economic issues and opportunities and challenges. Then we had a very vibrant discussion on a budget. And finally, we had these very well experienced business leaders sharing their views and sharing openly, candidly, and the challenges. I think more than opportunities, I think it is extremely important for us to understand what the challenges lay ahead us. Because some of these challenges you and I simply don't have power to overcome. So we got to adapt ourselves. Because inconsistency, contradictions, non-consultation are constant in our country, unfortunately. Okay, so that is something we got to live with. Okay, there was an interesting question somebody had asked, posed to D, that everybody is talking about low ease of doing business. But here's a man, he brought, London Stock Exchange back office, BSL, to Sri Lanka in 6 months, 7 months, something like that. 9 months, okay? So, well, there are ways of, doing things, overcoming challenges. So that's, I can't think of any other, example than what D has achieved, excuse me, yeah, D has achieved. So anyway, I don't want to take so any more of your time, and you're most welcome to join us for drinks. And I hope, some of our speakers will stay behind so you can continue. And ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and thank our wonderful panel.
LBR LBO Debrief.